If you think about where supply chains have been for the last several decades, and you look at how supply chain has changed, I think the thing that's so cool is that the problems that supply chain continues to address or continue to attempt to address are effectively unchanged as we've moved forward over time. As you look at what supply chains have done for the past several years, we as a supply chain practitioner group have always focused on what do we do with production, with inventory, with transportation, moving that around with the right information to meet all the demands of the real world of everything that you have coming together. And in that place, since going back probably to the 70s when MRP was invented, tools and systems have been put in place to address that. We have ERP systems that have been around for forever. We have WMSs, we have TMSs, we have scheduling tools, we have MES, we have all sorts of different point solutions, or even in some cases, major platforms that have come into organizations to help drive incremental improvement in their supply chains. But the challenges that exist in supply chains are effectively unchanged from where they were 40 years ago. We're still looking at how can we make better decisions around getting our product to market faster, especially in the modern day. What are all those bits and pieces that we're doing to really accelerate getting our product where it needs to go? Not only do we have to get that product where it has to go, we have to do that for less cost than we get on a per unit basis than we have in the past years. Solving those challenges are age-old supply chain problems, and the pressure to do that, especially with the rate of change you see in the supply chain environment based on consumer demand today, is unprecedented. In order to do that, we as organizations have tried to figure out how can we better collaborate between supply and demand, how can we better plan our inventory, better plan our capacity, how can we better model our demand so we can worry less about all that stuff you see over on the left. But these challenges are persistent, they're common, and they're regularly recurring around where we need to drive benefit and where we can connect plans across the enterprise to take planning forward, especially for supply chain to be successful in the future. So this is an eye chart intentionally, but the point is, Anaplan does a lot of work to solve individual problems across organizations, not just supply chains, but organizations as a whole. It gives us the ability to really drive changes in parts of the supply chain. All over finance, there's going to be some great sessions around finance and connected planning, as well as sales and connected planning. And what we want to talk about today is not the individual supply chain capabilities that we're addressing, but how do we actually bring these together to address those problems we just talked about in novel ways that can help take our organizations, our supply chains to that next level. So how many of you were in the last connected planning session with Jason Ambrose? Okay, I see only a couple of hands. Perfect. So when we say connected, there are a couple things that we're really looking at. First off is that, if you listen to some of the truths, you heard one on stage this morning with Frank and Malcolm Gladwell, but if you look at the truths around where plans are going, what that really means is we need to take plans and get them as close to the execution layer as possible. Because we live in a world, especially from a supply chain standpoint, that is changing on such a regular basis of where we need to be able to react and respond, not just to changes on our internal side, but also changes in the market. Our ability to move quickly, to be fast, to be able to respond, to execute in near real time and replan or update plans is absolutely critical. In doing that, we cannot operate in a vacuum. This is something in the past, especially for anyone who's come out of a planning organization, it's okay, on a certain day of the week, I'll take the data out of my system, I'll run it through the following steps, then I'll take it and I'll send it to the next team, then I'll send it to the next team, and I'll send it to the next team as we consolidate demand or we collaborate around trying to work through an optimization problem. Or maybe just you pull the data out and you work for 3 or 4 days to resolve a whole bunch of exceptions, but you're doing that independently. What happens is that when you pull that information together, all of a sudden it's not worked in a collaborative manner anymore. You're taking it out of a system, you're trying to make decisions, you make phone calls, you send emails, you work across the board. Connected planning is collaborative. We're working in near real time on a single platform across the board where the right users have access to the right information at the right point in time. And last but not least, especially as you heard about over the last couple of days and as you heard in the keynote this morning, all these plans, as we bring them together, are intelligent. We have the ability to apply additional analysis on top of everything because it's all in one platform across supply chain, across sales, across finance to drive better insights for the organization, to make better decisions and ultimately achieve and beat sort of that next step of all those problems we talked about just a moment ago. So really quickly, we put together a hypothetical company to talk about where supply chain actually drives value and what it does. This is not customer specific. This is just sort of taking a look at some of the different parts of the industry and looking at some averages across the board of how you see organizations invest their money on the P&L. Obviously, there are a lot of line items there. Supply chain touches an incredible amount of it. It could be anything from demand shaping. How do we use trade promotions? How do we use discounts? Or in the B2B space, how do we provide value-add services to help customers out? From a COGS standpoint, everyone is familiar with direct materials and inventory. We also have non-material spend, looking at the other costs, overhead labor, and making sure we maximize the efficiency of those other costs in terms of cost of goods sold or cost of goods manufactured for an organization. We have the IT cost, all those systems we just spoken about a couple minutes ago, looking at what are all the IT expenses associated with supporting and maintaining all those point solutions if they're IT owned, plus the myriad of business solutions that may have built and been and grown up over time in order to actually pull the pieces together so we can run and operate as fast as we have to run today. You know, R&D actually is an interesting area. I'm sure for anyone who grew up in a technical track, such as engineering or product development, the old adage is R&D is 5% the cost of the product, but impacts 70% of the cost of the product. So the decisions that are made by an R&D team around material selection, supplier selection, what types of tooling or manufacturing that are used, the prototype materials, granted that is expensive, and you'd see that here, but all those pieces and how you bring those together to select that next product. Supply chain, hopefully in your organization, is playing a key role in helping those R&D teams make the best decisions so you can optimize how you spend your money. And last but not least, for all those investments that are made, we have the depreciation on the CapEx that's come together to do that. So I'm sure some of you are kind of thinking about this and where is it going, but the piece that's most important is the fact that supply chain touches 60% of the income statement, and it's fundamentally responsible for delivering 100% of the revenue for that organization and for your organization, especially when you're in a goods-based company. That's huge. How can we connect the plans across the organization such that we can be more impactful with delivering value and solving some of those problems that we had just talked about? Now, as interesting as this is, I think there's another stat that is probably far more telling, which is despite the fact that supply chain is so huge to how we operate as an organization, you know, all the advances, all the tools, all the decisions, all the support, everything we've done, despite all of that, approximately 1% of revenue is still used to make decisions that are isolated, not collaborative, and offline. We're doing this not in a negative way. It's just we have all those point solutions that are out there. We have to pull data out. We have to bring it together and collaborate. We have to find ways to actually go in and analyze and use it to solve those problems. In a variety of situations, and by the way, this is not a stat from customers. This is just taking a look at some of the things that we hear and we see based on other research that's done. But if you look at that with regard to supply chain, 1% of revenue relative to 60% of revenue, we're making offline decisions that aren't connected. And that data, the quality could be suspect. That's huge. What are the things that we can enable as we look at how to take this and go from, you know, these non-dynamic or sort of inflexible plans, how do we connect them together, and how do we use them to drive better intelligent decisions across the organization? Now, the types of solutions I want to talk about today, these are probably not what I would call traditional supply chain solutions, which is fair. What I'm focused on is as we connect across supply chain, across finance, across sales, and bring everything together, what are the capabilities that we can enable for our organization in order to solve those challenges we were talking about before, in terms of making better decisions, in terms of, you know, better modeling demand, in terms of better driving capacity analysis or better driving collaboration across both within our enterprise and connecting plans and collaborating outside of our enterprise. So there are 5 types of solutions I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about today, and then take a look at how those can actually impact your organization moving forward. So the first 2, I should say, are really focused around how do we deliver bottom line outcomes for the organization. looking at what's the cost to serve. Another term you may have heard for something like this is called zero-based supply chain. But how can we actually connect supply chain performance directly to and tie it against the financials associated with operating for those individual pieces, beyond just production accounting or production finance, but actually taking it to every step we can across the network. Same as looking at order profitability and the impact of the decisions we make for orders, both for inbound POs as well as outbound sales orders, depending on the type of business that you're in. And use that to drive bottom line results and also start reducing cost of goods sold. Further, what can we do to look at how do we drive top line growth and use supply chain as a competitive weapon for the business? We do enable 100% of the revenue, so how can we do this to enable more revenue at that same cost basis we've been looking at? How do we look at the scenarios available within S&OP as it connects across the entire organization? How do we look at better decisions around product portfolio planning? How do we collaborate on demand across our enterprise, across other enterprises? And how can we use this to drive benefit for the enterprise? So really quickly, just to step in, we'll spend a couple of minutes talking through each of these. As we look at cost to serve management, as I was saying just a moment ago, this is about how do we drive transparent accountability for continuous improvement in all of those non-material spend cost areas. The reason this becomes so important, especially as we look at the complexity of our networks associated today, all the decisions that are being made across the board, this gives us the ability to actually go in and identify individuals within our organization who are exceptional at their jobs and help them connect across the enterprise within their organization to share the great activity and the great performance that they've done to enable their business and bring that best practice to everyone else. That sounds like standard Kaizen or standard lean improvement. The difference here in what we're talking about when we connect the finance side with the supply chain side is now, instead of just sharing best practices, I'm able to share that best practice and tie it directly to a respective budget for logistics, for order management, for purchasing, for transport. So that by bringing those two pieces together, I can now start looking at, if I make this change here, how can I tie that plan back to the actuals of performance? Now, can I use that to actually go and ask the questions of, hey, this looks great based on the activity you've performed, you're not doing as well as some of your peers. What are the things that we can help you with, or what are the challenges you're facing to actually enable additional cost management across your enterprise within your specific function? The way we might take a look at doing this is we'll tie our traditional supply planning activities, our inventory planning activities, our distribution or network planning activities, and how do we tie that to OpEx in finance? If we're able to pull these pieces together, how do I tie that to my COGS planning or operations or workforce planning to look at what do I really need in order to be successful, both on the financial side of being able to achieve this as well as the supply chain side? I can't sacrifice service level because I'm already under a lot of pressure to deliver for customers. So how do I continue to achieve what I'm achieving today or improve my service level and at the same time have good financial discipline and transparent accountability that I can bring to the organization to deliver effective outcomes? So this is what we're kind of thinking about from a cost to serve standpoint. Order profitability analysis. Now, how many of you have ever been in a situation where my inbound order is late coming into the DC? I think I'm going to be in a stock out scenario based on all the information I have, so I try to expedite and get it there as fast as possible. I would think anyone who's ever been in a transport or logistics role is putting their hand up on this one. Expedite is the name of the game when I'm trying to make sure inventory gets where it needs to go. But what happens if I don't have good visibility into my DCs and everything I expedite ends up sitting out on the dock for a week or two because I didn't know what the capacity in the DC was to actually handle that inbound order right now? That's where the profitability analysis comes in. When I'm making those decisions for expedite versus not, how do I balance the cost versus the lead time of that change? How do I balance changes in promotion versus changes in service level? So I can look not just at my individual action and my function, but how can I look at the impact of that action across my network to make sure I'm achieving the service level that I need to in order to deliver products to market and deliver that to customers. This involves a whole slew of these types of decision making, but really it still focuses on making sure I can get everything to market as fast as possible through my network as fast as possible based on pulling the information available in to start driving, before I hit the, pick up the phone and call FedEx, or before I hit the order to FedEx to say let's expedite, making sure I've thought through and actually done the analysis necessary that this is going to be the most profitable decision that we can make at this point in time based on everything we have available to us and everything we know. Similar to the cost to serve discussion, this is how we bring together the different type of policies for inventory management, the what-if capabilities on the platform to understand if I make this change right now, how might this impact an order? We're bringing planning down to the execution level so I can plan through. I've connected finance and supply chain together. Let's actually look at what might my P&L impact be or my budget impact be specific to these types of decisions that I'm making right now in order to be effective and achieve whatever my service level goals and objectives are. How do I make sure I don't blow my logistics budget that's been set? Or based on a change in market conditions or a change in demand, maybe it's okay. But now what you've done is you've given the data and you've empowered your logistics planners or your logistics and transportation teams to be able to have the information available at their fingertips so they can make better decisions as they move through their day-to-day activities around what it takes to actually move purchase orders or sales orders to market and through our network and do so in a manner that's going to be most effective overall. So, we've talked about so far primarily focused on how do we deliver bottom line results? How do we get plans as close to execution as possible? The next one, and there's actually going to be a great discussion about this tomorrow as well in connected planning for CPG. But looking at S&OP in a broader sense in the past, and really, I think and the comment was made this morning, plans as we know them are dead. Getting plans as close to execution as possible, making plans collaborative across the board are going to be absolutely critical. And doing so in a manner, oftentimes my planning horizons are very different from my response horizons. From the planning standpoint, how many times has a plan been put together and someone will go and they'll print it out and they'll be really excited and say, well, guys, this is the plan. This is looking at what we've done in the past. We need to understand how does this go forward into the future. Making these plans collaborative, making them evolutionary, not in, exciting evolutionary, but so that they can evolve over time. And as you look at the manager-driven S&OP, this is a big piece of that because the market will constantly be changing. Consumer demand is always changing. There are events, there are things that occur all the time. If I have, unparalleled connectivity between understanding my financials, understanding my sales forecasts, especially in a B2B space where I have a dedicated sales team, being able to bring in sales insights or financial insights, and using those to bring sales and finance together with supply chain, I can really start diving in depth around the scenarios that I need to understand for what might my S&OP process deliver and what might be the conditions that I'm operating in and under over the next whatever my planning cycle is, probably 2+ years. There are tons of scenarios. Oftentimes it might be I'll have 2 or 3 drivers that I can look at. Let's take that and blow it out to all the drivers we need to actually understand the impact across the business. In S&OP, finance review has typically come at the end. Well, we've made a bunch of decisions, we've tried to configure, we did this, we changed some of our inventory policies. If all the finance data is available on the platform, the finance review is moot. It is ongoing. We have everything from day one in there. And as we're making our decisions across all the other functions, across HR, across IT, across supply chain, across sales, the finance piece in the background, from a scenario standpoint, we can constantly be looking at those. We can constantly be understanding how they evolve, such that when we get together, we can drive confidence in the quality of the decisions based on what the up or downside or the opportunities and the threats may be in the market to our operations as they stand. The scenarios and the plans can be documented and stored and captured in one place, such that we're able to bring the pieces together and understand if the following indicators change in the market, we may need to execute. I know what my lead time is for making these changes. I know what the changes across all the functions might be. And on top of that, I can compare that plan moving forward to actuals to see would that scenario have borne out if nothing had happened. So that's as we look at the depth and the richness of the scenarios and the what if that are capable in the traditional S&OP or IBP process, depending on which term you use. That's where we're able to drive real value across the board in delivering business plans that not only achieve your bottom line, but also some of your top line growth objectives. On a product portfolio side, S&OP is great for supply and demand, but let's talk about how we actually get products launched. How many of you have ever been part of a product launch that's late? How big of an impact was across suppliers, across the network? How many sleepless nights did we have to work through and re-optimize that network to make sure we had everything available, we were still running at full capacity as possible? Making better product planning decisions, like we said at the beginning, this is an area where R&D historically in most organizations is a relatively small percentage of total spend, but has outsized impact across the entire P&L. So how do we drive better decision making in the space for product planning? And as we look at across the board, sales insights, what are customers saying or asking for in the field? As we look at bringing in third-party data, I think there were some great examples we saw earlier today in the keynote around different types of data that we can use in to make better decisions. How do we look at historic NPI or end of life for our products? How do we make better cannibalization decisions? More importantly, if I'm looking at brands and how a brand is performing or the underpinning technology platforms, how do I understand what was the cost of developing that brand or building that platform, and how can I amortize that more effectively across other products? How can I build that technology in and meet my cost curves and my cost objectives that I have, such that I can hit my gross margin targets? How can I use all my historic data to mix up forecasts and develop what I expect my demand to meet? How do I match them? Okay, I think we're good. How do I match that against what we've seen for the actuals to date in order to make the right decisions? Is this product launch succeeding in the manner that we expect it to be? These are the types of decisions that product portfolio planning can help deliver. And we can do this by tying directly back to finance and help our R&D leadership better understand the ROI on R&D that they're driving for their organization so that they can target their investments more effectively based on their strategic objectives. And full disclosure, having spent time working with R&D organizations, it doesn't always have to be about what's the most profitable. It's about making sure that we're targeting our investments and they're on strategy and they're moving in the direction that we need to go as a company. Product portfolio planning can help you tie these together because we're able to bring all the functions into one and share and collaborate. And then the best part is I can take that demand forecast and I'm more confident in being able to feed that into my operations planning and my S&OP cycles. And last but not least, demand collaboration. So a lot of the connectivity we've been talking about so far has really been looking at connectivity within functions, like we saw at the beginning, or within the enterprise, about bringing different functions together to talk about all the impact that we can have to help deliver results and benefits for our enterprise. Demand collaboration looks much more broadly than that. This is where we actually start going outside the four walls and bringing in demand signals across the board. How do we collaborate with our channels? How do we collaborate with our customers? And let's do this across multiple dimensions. There may be instances where as we look at what that demand profile is, that's going to be wildly different than what our customers may be forecasting. It could be very different than what the overall economic indicators may be for that entire market, especially if I'm tying together multiple sets of data. And being able to collaborate in near time with our customers around what that might look like becomes very powerful, because if I have a demand plan that's coming together, that demand plan will be dependent upon my perspective. But if I have a channel partner, if I'm moving into an end retailer, that retailer may also have different perspective. There may be existing supply agreements in place around how we do inventory management, how we do discounts, all that stuff. If I can take that and build it into my overall demand plan, and then I can work collaboratively with my customers around what that actually looks like, it helps with a couple things. First, it helps everyone tune what those incentives should be at every step along the chain. Maybe I don't have to do as much end marketing if my customer is really planning on pushing this product as part of what we're going to be doing for a particular season. Maybe I need to invest in channel marketing if there isn't as much attached as we hope to see out in the marketplace. But by being able to collaborate with customers and share more details around this plan and do this in a manner that's going to be more decentralized, more collaborative, better understand what's going on, it gives more levers and more drivers to a planning team to make better decisions about how they plan their demand. It also helps that we heard a great story during one of our meetings yesterday. It also helps make the right decisions of, well, maybe I actually need less product in market. Maybe I should sell less because, look at all the marketing, all the promotion, all the discounts that are being offered. I may not need as much, or maybe I need more. And how does that impact bottom line profitability? How does that impact capacity? So being able to collaborate with demand across the enterprise and across multiple enterprises becomes, and do so in a manner that's on a platform, it's in real time, I can share the information. If I'm on a call with a customer, we can go in and update information on the fly so that everything is going to be updated and fed into that next step of the cycle for a monthly planning review. That becomes to the point at the very beginning about competitive weapons in the supply chain. That's what we can do to really start driving performance for our organization, for our supply chain. So these are just 5 areas that we've been thinking about, ways that we can deliver bottom line benefits, where we can drive reduction in COGS, where we can drive top line sales growth for organizations. But as I showed that picture at the very beginning, that was just across all the different types of planning that Anaplan has done in traditional point use case solutions. Think of your organization. Think of how this might be able to drive together and deliver these types of impacts for you. So if we look back at where connected planning is helping out that theoretical customer we talked about at the very beginning, we're doing quite a bit around how we're able to drive margin. Now, whether or not you believe that you can double your net income, that would be fantastic. I certainly would love if we could do that for every enterprise we worked with. But the point is, as we look at what all those use cases actually are and where we're able to drive benefit, because we're already touching so much of the income statement, and because everyone who's ever worked in supply chain knows for every $1 in cost I can squeeze out, that's the same as $10 in revenue typically. Minor improvements we're able to connect supply chain performance can have outsized impacts on the bottom line, as if our sales growth is jumping incredibly. And at the same time, by making smarter decisions across the supply chain, we're able to decrease stockouts. We're able to make smarter decisions on a tactical, almost execution level. It helps me think and do the analysis before I hit the button and hit send on that order right away. Well, let's check. Is it going to be the right decision based on channel inventory, based on cost of the shipment, based on the capacity of the DC? Helping make those types of decisions, that's the whole purpose of connected planning for supply chain. It's helping bring plans to execution and make those smarter decisions. Now, I know this seems outsized and like it's an incredibly impactful set of outcomes, and of course it would be, but don't take my word for it. If you look at the speed, the agility, velocity of where Anaplan has actually delivered benefits for some of our customers, it's not uncommon for customers to tell us that we're able to help shorten their planning cycle time by 80%. Is it 2 weeks to 2 days? Is it a day to a couple of hours? Imagine if it's an hour down to a few minutes. What are the types of capabilities our supply chain can enable? How can we accelerate order turnaround time for fulfillment? How can we reallocate our current organization that we know incredibly well using a workforce planning solution? How do we get that group out of exception management or exception handling? And how do we get that group into identifying what are the scenarios we need to plan for? This is where connected supply chain and connected planning for supply chain is able to drive benefits for those organizations in terms of doing things faster. Where have we delivered improvements in inventory and order management capacity? There was one customer that we've worked with where we've been able to deliver them a sustained increase in net income just through simple execution of connected plans. And then if we look at the visibility that the tool is able to provide in terms of planning additional revenue, planning tens of thousands of SKUs across the network, enabling new capabilities that we didn't have before. By bringing this information together, this is just the first step of what it will take to make connected planning for your supply chain possible moving forward. All right, so with that, thank you. Open it up to questions.
Hi. A lot of what you talked about was making decisions based off of data. Can you talk a little bit about Anaplan's scenario planning capabilities?
Sure. So one thing that Anaplan does that I would say is a bit different than what I would say traditional planning software does, or other planning platforms, is that when I create my forecast, and the way I envision creating forecasts in the future is I should have my baseline that I'm putting forth, but then as I start building my scenarios, that's effectively an entire separate parallel version of the model. So as I'm thinking through this, and we actually had this discussion a few weeks ago with a customer, what becomes really important around planning through those scenarios we talked about is what's the process at which point that next real evolutionary scenario is required. Because if we're not careful about the decisions we make, I could have millions of scenarios, and then it's as effective as it is right now with only a handful of scenarios. So it's understanding what are the drivers at what level of indenture in the organization. What I'm talking about at the top level in an exec S&OP is going to be very different than what I'm going to talk about in my demand or my supply reviews. And understanding what the levers exist that are available. And then once we've identified those levers, how can we make sure that those are embedded from early in the process across the board? So that's one thing. Another is from a scenario planning standpoint, who should be creating what types of scenarios? So for instance, it might be the finance org that's saying, okay, top line, what happens if we have this upside total for the market? What happens if we have this downside? What happens if these macro factors change? That could be the macro scenarios in which we start, but then as I work through every step of the scenario process, understanding down to pretty fine level of granularity and detail, how that impacts my function is the next piece that we would want to work through in that parallel scenario before bringing everything back together for that exec S&OP type of review. Is that helpful?
So I feel like that's a lot of the process of how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
The part that I'm not clear on is like Anaplan's capabilities to enable that, because it's something that our teams have been asking for a lot. And what we'd like to be able to see is, parameter-based adjustment. If I change this lever or this lever, compare those and show me the output. And then yes, you have to do like down to the detail level.
Mm-hmm.
But even having that visual to be able to compare your different scenarios, and it's sort of a one-time thing. You don't need to save it for all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to directly compare maybe 2 or 3 different options. Is that possible today?
I was in a meeting where we showed that last week, so let's talk after.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we have time for one more.
Okay, one more question. Anyone? Yes. Thank you.
That really isn't a box of tissues. Nice. I was wondering what you've seen so far in the accuracy of the data for the inputs, because all this is great, but as we know, garbage in, garbage out. So as your inputs are coming in, how does Anaplan help you deal with like lots of zeros and lots of places where maybe the data might not be correct, to help you see that and fix it as you go, as opposed to waiting for finance to tell you at the end of the month?
So there are a handful of ways to address that, and you raised a very good point. You're exactly right. Garbage in, garbage out is what you're going to is the kiss of death for this type of activity, and especially as I get down to those lower levels of activity, because it may be relatively accurate at the top line, but if I start getting down to, it's going to become a challenge. So there are a couple ways that can be addressed. First is, and something that we actually spent a lot of time talking about yesterday, is looking at master data governance and how that's going to be used across the board. Another is sort of instantiating organizational policies and working with teams around data ownership and data maintenance. So one thing, especially as data comes to the forefront of these organizations that we've been working with, is how do we actually drive adoption of data hygiene practices at all levels of the organization that are responsible for ownership. I'll use an example from a previous life. There was a client that I'd worked with many years ago. Then their material master, I think, had 300 or 400 columns for data that had to be entered. They were all really important to someone at some point in time. But what we did is we went through and we were working with that organization and said, okay, so who owns this element? And it was a cross-functional team. Who owns this element? What's the responsibility for updating that? By the time we had gotten to the end of it, it was closer to about 70 or 80, which was still a lot. But all those that had been identified previously, they were put in place largely to address some of the challenges we've talked about today. And by being able to pull in and drive those types of cleanup and that type of discipline that may have not been resident in the organization for a long time, that's the best way to address some of this moving forward. There are also ways, and we heard some stories yesterday talking about how there are different capabilities to look at triggers of has something actually cleared, is it loaded correctly, that can be deployed as part of the early stage of going through this process.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. Yesterday we heard a story from Coca-Cola, actually, who in their statistical forecasting model, every Monday when new data comes in, if there's a problem with the data, based on all parameters that they set forth to look out for with errors, they'll get a notification. They can dive right in and find those errors. Thank you, Evan.